webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey guys, how you doing? We're going to be starting shortly. Okay guys, can everyone hear me out there? If you can hear me, can you please raise your hand on the GoToWebinar controls? Perfect. Okay, so everybody, how you doing? My name's Garrett, and I work in the marketing department here at QASource. Welcome to today's Agilistry and QA Meetup group. Joining us here today is Andrew Webster. Andrew will be presenting today's webinar, the Agile Appetizer. Andrew is an Agile mage and has worked in software development for over 20 years. Andrew holds the following certifications: CSM, CSPO, CSP, NLP Master Practitioner, and Drexler Cibet Team Performance Indicator Facilitator. Andrew has been Agilist since 2004. Andrew has more than 60 projects under his belt. Some of his previous clients include BBVA Compass, Visa, PayPal, and Google subsidiary Nest. Okay, without further ado, I'll now hand over the controls to Andrew.
Got it. Good. Hello, everybody. Gosh, guilty as charged. It's a little intimidating when hearing the list of my certifications, and there's actually a bunch more, but you know how it is. So why we're doing this presentation tonight? I've got a lot of experience in the world of Agile, but I actually nowadays really think of myself more as a sort of enterprise transformation coach rather than as an Agile coach. That's because I do a lot more than just Agile stuff. But one of the things that I've seen, particularly over the last few years, is that there's a lot of bad Agile. There's a lot of people who have had a go at fulfilling the sort of promise of Agile and it hasn't worked out for them, or people who don't feel that it would be right for them or whatever, which is a terrible shame, because in a way, Agile is sort of one of the ways of really revealing the underlying physics of work, the way how work works. And so I was regularly asked to help spin up teams or introduce the idea to management or executives. And so over time, I developed what you're going to see tonight, a thing I call the Agile Appetizer. And it's really only just an appetizer, a taster for some of the things that sort of lie underneath Agile. Because one of the dysfunctions that I've seen is when people just sort of turn up and just try and teach you Scrum the way it's done, and it just occurs as something else on top of what you're doing. So this is going to be a little bit theoretical, and it's going to be pretty quick. There's a lot of information that I'm giving you. I'm skipping across the surface of things, and because we're doing this as a webinar and not in person, it's going to be a little hard to handle questions, but I should have a few minutes towards the end. I can see the chat here, so do feel free to put your questions into chat. And if, like I say, we have a few minutes towards the end, then I'll actually deal with any questions I can. What I'll also do is supply the guys at QASource to pass on to you a copy of the deck. I know this is being recorded as well, but you can also have a copy of the deck. It'll be a copy that runs, but it won't be one that you can edit, because as you'll see, there's a whole bunch of clever stuff that I've done in it. I'll provide a sort of 2-pager handout as well, and my contact details will be in there. So if you're really stuck, you can always email me for more questions. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to turn off my webcam so that we can actually get into the presentation. There we go. So like I say, the Agile Appetizer is really just a taste of all things Agile. And I'm going to start it, rather than dealing with a question from you to me, I'm going to start it with a question from me to you. What do you know? Well, that's kind of a big question, isn't it? So I'll be a bit more precise. Let me ask you, what do you know, say, about the project that you're working on right at the moment? Well, let's say this circle that I just drew for you, let's say that represents absolutely everything you could possibly know about this project, right? Everything there is to know. Well, right at the beginning, how much do you actually know? Well, maybe I exaggerate slightly for the sake of effect. Let's be a bit more generous. Let's give you this slice. And this slice is the stuff that you know at the beginning of the project. And the point about it is it's something that you know that you know. And the test for things that you know is that you can take action. I know that I know how to speak English. I'm doing it. But there's also stuff that you know that you don't know. So, for example, I don't know how to fly a plane. I don't know how to speak Mandarin. So if I had a project where I had to take on those skills, I'd need to buffer to allow for bringing those skills up, for example. Well, if that's everything that you know and everything that you know that you don't know, what's all the rest of this? Well, you've probably guessed. It's everything that you don't know that you don't know. Now, if we were all together in person right now, I'd have some fun. I'd ask you to tell me something that you don't know that you don't know. And we all stand there staring at each other because I don't know what I don't know, right? It's an impossible question to answer. But bear in mind that this circle represents everything that you could possibly know about this project. So inside this big area of what you don't know that you don't know, do you think there are going to be nasty surprises in there? Do you think there might be more work in there than you expected or less, right? So the idea behind Agile is to really try and move everything around. And this includes that little last slice of what you don't know that you do know. That slice occasionally gives you a happy surprise where you might actually get some work done early. There's been a lot of research done about this by many, many organizations. And typically what people find is that if you're trying to do plan-driven work, where you do the whole plan up front, well, a tiny proportion of projects done that way may come in early. A small proportion may come in roughly on time, but the vast majority will come in late, over budget, sometimes by an order of magnitude. And it's because of this. It's because of what you don't know that you don't know. And the point is that we're talking about software. We're talking about something that's creative. And by the very definition of it being creative, there's got to be stuff that you don't know that you don't know. I mean, put it this way, it's software. If you'd done it before or somebody else had done it, you'd use that, right? So you've got to be doing something that you've not done before. So there must be stuff you just don't know that you don't know, right? So what I'm going to do, I'll put this over on one side, and over the rest of these few minutes, I'm going to fill this screen up. It's going to be a little bit like that parable of the blind men. And they were feeling this thing. And one of them was saying, you know, I think this is a wall. And another one was like, no, I think it's a tree trunk. And another one was like, no, it's a branch. And another one was like, no, it's a rope. Guys, it's an elephant. It's an elephant, right? And so I'm going to try and show you all of these things to kind of show you the agile elephant. Good, I hadn't actually ever described it quite like that, but that's rather nice. Have you ever heard the expression, how do you eat an elephant? One slice at a time. I'm going to show you some of the slices. Right, let's move on to the next one. Now, hands up anybody who's not human. Good, good. There's sometimes one or two, and you're always welcome anyhow, but it's a reasonable assumption that all of us are human, right? And so what I'm showing you right now is a chart from the extraordinary site, Our World in Data, which is a great source of things like this. And what it shows is an estimate of the world's population over the last 12,000 years and projected slightly into the future, into 2100. And I've actually seen versions of this chart that go back a lot further than this. I mean, the thing to bear in mind is that we're all humans. We're all Homo sapiens, and Homo sapiens has actually been around for gosh, 200,000 to 300,000 years. I mean, every time I get a new edition of The New Scientist, it seems to be further back that we find out about. Let's say 200,000 years. And so for most of that time, us humans managed to survive and thrive because there are a few things that we were particularly clever at. We were particularly clever at taking patterns of things from the past that we could then use to predict the future and react in the present. We're really good at this. It meant that we didn't have to spend all of our waking hour trying to figure everything out. A lot of stuff we'd already figured out, right? So in a way, you could say that our brains are pattern matching tools. And they learned to do this in a pace of change that was seasonal, that was generational. That you could say that, you know, how things were for your grandparents were kind of how they're going to be for your grandchildren. How things were last year are probably how things are going to be next year. Well, that worked fine for most of those 200,000 years, which is several tens of thousands of generations. Maybe 15,000 generations. Then about, I don't know, depending on where you start counting, 5,000 to 6,000 years ago, agriculture happened and we started to settle down. And then, a bunch of interesting things happened, but the most important one was about 200 years ago, when somebody noticed that the lid of a kettle rattled when it boiled, and the next thing you know, we have steam power and the Industrial Revolution. Well, at that point, there were 1 billion people on the planet. 200 years later, there are 7 billion people on the planet. So that's 200,000 years to get to 1 billion, 200 years to get to 7 billion. In fact, in my lifetime, the number of people on the planet has doubled. So what I'm trying to get across to you is that we have brains that operate at the pace of seasonal and generational change, but we've actually rather accelerated our lives. At the pace of change now, if you look at the rate of increase of population as a proxy for that pace of change, oh my goodness, we have no native biological equipment that's designed to handle this kind of pace of change. So one of the other things that we developed in all of that time, which was really good at keeping us alive, was something called fear. Well, let me explain. If you met something that was not something that fitted a pattern you already knew, well, you'd want to be a bit cautious about it. And in fact, one of the things that fear has done for us, it's given us something called the threat response, which is all about fight, flight, or freeze. And the thing is, we still have all of the equipment to have that threat response. Now, I've been in many workplaces, but I've never actually been chased by a bear in a workplace, right? So there's nothing actually sort of physical for me to be scared of. But us humans, we've learned to be social. I mean, we have very long childhoods. When we're little, we're weak, squishy, and delicious. And we have to be social in order to deal with threats like bears chasing us, right? On your own, you haven't got much of a chance. But if there's a bunch of you with sharp, pointy sticks, you might be able to fight off the bear. So still to this day, social threat, a threat that is basically telling the older portions of our brains, you might get kicked out of your tribe, occurs to us as literally being a threat of death. So I want you to understand this, that the incredible pace of change that we face right now basically has most people scared most of the time. And what I'm going to show you are some of the things that we've learned to do to manage that, okay? So let me pop that on one side. That's the next bit of this overall picture. Now, the next thing, all right, how many of you guys speak Welsh? Good Lord, none of you. What a surprise. Well, you know, here's one word that you're now going to know that's in the Welsh language, Cynefin. This word, C-Y-N-E-F-I-N, it's pronounced Cynefin, and it's a sense-making framework. Let me show you what I mean. We usually represent Cynefin like this. We draw this picture of like sort of 4 domains. Down here, the first one is the domain of things that are obvious. Then we have things that are complicated, complex, and chaotic. And these are very precise terms in Cynefin. Let me give you a little more detail. When things are obvious, you can sense them to categorize them and then know how to respond. And I usually illustrate this by showing people a pen. And I say, what's this? And they look at it and they go, it's a pen. What do you do with a pen? You write with it. There you go. So just by sensing it, by looking at it, you knew how to categorize it, you knew how to respond to it. Now, this is the area of best practice. This is where you can rely 100% on the same thing working the same way each time, right? Now, if in things that are complicated, it takes a little bit more. Now, I'll often trick people, and I'll go and try and write with the pen that I'm showing them, and it turns out it's not a pen. I actually have to analyze it a little bit and open it up, and it turns out it's one of those extending pointers that you use when you're doing a presentation. People like me absolutely love for poking screens, right? So in that case, it takes a little bit of analysis, and this is the realm of good practice. Another analogy might be like it's best practice when I get in my car, stick the key in and turn it on. But if I try and turn it on and it just makes a funny noise, then I need a mechanic who can analyze what's going wrong. And the mechanic will have many potential good practices, and he'll have to use his expertise to find out which one of them would actually resolve the problem with the car. Now, over here, we have the realm of things that are complex. Now, complex things, they're things like, the way how a flock of birds would fly, or the way how a shoal of fish would work, or the way how crowds move. This is something where knowing how to deal with them is only emergent. You can't really predict it ahead of time. And then lastly, we have the realm of things that are chaotic. And things that are chaotic, well, that's like, what's a good example? If my house caught fire, right? I would have to come up with a novel practice to deal with it, because I'm now in a state of crisis, and I'd probably end up jumping out of the window. This is not my usual practice for leaving my house, right? Let me show you a little bit more about this, because this kind of relates to the very first thing I showed you. Things that are obvious are just known. Things that are complicated are knowable. Things that are complex are unknown until you've actually probed into them, experimented into them. And things that are chaotic are literally unknowable, right? Now, let me just tip this thing on the back and show you a little bit more. So we've got these 4 realms: obvious, complicated, complex, and chaotic. Now, the first 2, obvious and complicated, they're ordered. They happen the same way each time. Each of the components in something that is obvious or something that's complicated, and the interaction of those components, the same each time. They happen the same way in the same order. Things that are in the chaotic or complex realm, that's not true. The relationship between the components in these realms changes every time, right? And this makes it extremely hard to try and do anything predictable there. Now, in the middle, there's actually this missing area of things that are disordered. And that's where you are when you actually don't know where you are, right? I hate to say it, but you could actually probably assert that most organizations, most of the time, are disordered. They actually don't know which one of these realms they're in, which one of these domains. Now, let's say that something unpredicted and dangerous and chaotic happens. You'd probably want to act to gain control of the situation. That might shift you over to things that are complex, where you might then be able to understand and move them into complicated. You might be able to move from complicated to obvious by standardizing, which is very appealing, but there's a trap in standardizing things. A standard, obvious approach will only work with the same components, with the same relationships in the same context. Now, if you stop paying attention and the context changes, you might lose control through complacency, and the next thing you know, you've got catastrophe. Whoops. The example typically given for this would be Kodak. They may have invented digital cameras, but in effect, to them, film was the obvious way to keep going, and other companies did a better job of shooting past them with exploiting digital photography. That's not completely true about Kodak, but it's a notion that most people relate to. People often refer to BlackBerry as well. You know, that they just completely missed out on the whole smartphone revolution. Anyhow, let me pick this back up and just finish this thought up about Cynefin. Something I want you to just look at here. Over on the right, in the domains of obvious and complicated, you sense first, then you have to do something, either categorize or analyze, before you can respond. And if you have existing skills and knowledge, you can use them, right? However, over on the left, you have to actually do something first before you can actually understand what's going on, before you can sense what's going on and figure out a response. And in particular, up in the complex realm, this is where agile approaches absolutely fit the bill, where you actually need to develop what you're doing with more than one safe to fail experiment. You might iterate and increment, you might try several things at the same time to find out what works. If you're over in the realm of things that are complicated or obvious, and really you do know what you're doing, there's nothing to stop you using a plan-driven or waterfall approach over there. But in the world of software development, that's mostly not what we're doing, right? Where we can, with things like automated testing, yes, absolutely. Automated testing sits in the realm of complicated. Okay, so this is a really, really helpful lens. Funnily enough, I actually just did a 2-day training in Cynefin, although I'd known about it for many years. And I suspect that Cynefin is something you will hear a lot more about over the coming years, as more and more people get to appreciate it's an incredibly helpful way of looking at your work situation, looking at any situation, and going, okay, how do we respond here? What's going on? How can I make sense of what's happening in front of me? So let's put that over on one side as well and move on to the next thing. Now, I like to ask people what they think of technical debt. What is technical debt? And people usually tell me, oh, well, it's stuff you haven't got back to yet. It's code that's not very well written. But there's actually a really precise definition that I love. It's this: the additional cost of adding new features. Let me show you what we mean by that. Now, if you can actually fairly consistently produce working new features over time, then you'd follow a straight line like this, more or less, right? And what we mean by that is if you've got a fairly robust sense of what done means, then you should be able to actually release working features pretty consistently. But we often see situations, particularly with people who've slightly misinterpreted what we mean by agile, where people rush into things. They're responding to market pressures. They might be a startup that really wants to get out there quick, and they're willing to actually release stuff that's not that well made, and then they have to come back to it to try and fix things up before they add in new features, and the next thing you know, things have ground to a halt. And what they've created for themselves is this yellow area of technical debt. You may have heard of YouTube's InnerTube project that they had to do, some years ago now, where they had to sort of stop work on anything new for several months and sort out some of the underlying platform work of everything that YouTube sat on before they could move ahead. I believe LinkedIn underwent a similar process, and according to the story I heard, which was secondhand, right after they actually did all of their work to sort out most of their technical debt, funnily enough, Microsoft bought them. I've worked at clients where, you know, they've rushed to market innovative products. Everybody loves them. A Silicon Valley giant has bought them. And the next thing you know, they actually find that they can't release anything new because their core technology, they didn't really do a very good job of it, and they've got to rebuild it completely so that they can extend it. It's a real problem, right? It's a simple concept. I'm going to put it on one side for now because we're going to touch on it again and again as we go through. All of these things we're going to sort of refer back to. Now, the next element of all of this are these concepts of doing things iteratively and incrementally. I speak a lot to the PMI, the Project Management Institute, and if you look at the PMBOK, the Project Management Institute Body of Knowledge, they're very clear about how there are plan-driven approaches to getting your work done. There's iterative approaches where you do things over and over. There's incremental, where you keep adding things to it, but then there's iterative and incremental, where you combine those two. And this is really what we're up to in the world of Agile. Let me show you. Oh, and by the way, I've completely stolen this next slide. I'll give credit when I've finished showing you. Now, let's start with this idea. Here we have an artist who's conceptualizing this beautiful painting, right? And he's got a patron who's going to pay for it. So he gets started, and he does this first bit. The patron's not really interested. He does this next bit, still not interested. And again, and again. Oh, finally, we've got it finished. And at that point, the patron would be willing to give him some money for it. Well, he learns a lesson from this. He decides that next time around, he's going to be a little bit less definite about it. He's going to come up with a rough version to begin with. I'm going to paint a woman in a pastoral setting. And he does a sketch. And he shows his patron. And the patron goes, yeah, I don't like that thing that she's doing with her fingers. That's weird. All right, how about this? Oh, that's better. Can I have some color? Like this? Yep. Well, yeah, but I don't know. I was expecting something a bit more somber. Yeah, okay, that's good. Any bit more detail, perhaps? Yes, lovely. But here's the thing. It's just possible that his patron could have looked at that first one and gone, oh, I like that. Oh, here you are, take my money. Right? That by iterating and incrementing, the artist here actually let the patron tell him what it was that he liked. Now, this slide was put together by the great Jeff Patton, and I'll refer to him again a little bit later, but I've got to give the man credit because it illustrates our point perfectly. Right, so let's put the Mona Lisa on one side over here and move on to the next concept. Now, you hear people talking about wanting to increase productivity and high performance and increased effectiveness, and I've learned to confront people by saying, really? Who cares about productivity? Really, who cares? Which can sometimes stop people a little bit in their tracks. Let me show you what I mean. You see, productivity is sometimes interpreted as, let's have all of our staff be busy. None of your customers are paying you for busy stuff, right? None of the people who benefit from your work give a damn how busy your people are. What they care about is it of benefit to them? And so this is what we look at. We look at value on the left versus effort across the bottom, the bang for the buck, how useful it is versus how much you have to put into it. If you don't estimate value, then it kind of makes sense to do the biggest thing first, right? That's probably got the most risk in it, so let's get the biggest thing out the way first. But we're not estimating value, so all of our work is considered to be basically of the same value. So when you stack it up, you get a curve that looks a little bit like that. Big thing first, smallest thing at the end. But what if we're wrong? What if these things all have different amounts of value? Well, let's go ahead and estimate the value as well as the effort and rearrange them. If we do that, it would look something like that. This first one has got the highest value for the smallest effort. This next one, it's about the same value, but there's more effort. Oh, I see. This next one, oh, the ratio's gone down a bit, and then down a bit, and then down a bit. Huh. Gosh, that's a different shaped curve, isn't it? Look at the two of them. Look at that. You see, the first way, the sort of curve of creation of value roughly followed that line. The second way, it followed that line. That's interesting. In fact, let me show you something. What if we left just one thing out of each one? If we left that last one out of that one, the second one, look at that. It uses about half the time of the other. Goodness me, goodness me. And yet virtually none of my clients, when I go and first visit them, have any idea about the value of what it is that they're doing. It's one of the first things that I've learned to actually bring to people's attention is what it takes to actually estimate value. And I'll talk more about this in a minute. And there are exercises that you can do to actually estimate value, right? In fact, these few slides, these two curves, are in a way, that's a product owner's or product manager's job in a nutshell. Right, let me put that on one side. That's really important. Really, if you forget everything else and just remember that one, you've got value out of tonight. Okay, next one. Now, I told you I'd say a little bit more about value. Well, let me show you what I mean by that. I mean, typically, you might start thinking about revenue, good old revenue, right? And you drive revenue up, maybe by doing more sales, or maybe you can have more savings, right? Now, savings might come from, I don't know, better security or better automation or maybe a simpler organization, right? You might find that you can get better sales from innovation, from better marketing, from good business development. Maybe innovation might come from the team, or maybe you actually invent something. Oh my goodness, awesome basic research. And of course, one of the values that you must pay attention to if you're in a listed company is stock prices. Good Lord. I mean, that old stock market, it will lead your company around by the nose if you're not careful. But this is just to illustrate the idea that you can see there's kind of a hierarchy of things that you could consider to be value, right? When you say value, people typically think about money. But here's the thing, when does the money show up? At the end, afterwards. Huh. So you want other things that you can use that actually can start to predict, are you moving towards the things that will make you money? And what's really interesting is that if you've got some of these, then you can start to be thinking about, well, you know, we should never do any work unless we're actually one or more of these values. And then you can actually track how those values change over the duration of your project. It would be really useful. That's another really, really helpful idea. Getting some idea of the hierarchy of values. Oh yes, we like that one very much indeed. Now, let's move on to the next thing. Now, if any of you have got any sort of PMI training, you'll be used to work breakdown structures. Everybody's kind of used to the idea of how you break work down, and typically you might think of it a little bit like this. Here we've got a potentially deliverable product increment, a chunk of work that you've finished. It's a small one. It, with its buddies, might contribute to a larger one, right? This is when you're thinking of things by component. They would contribute maybe to the overall program or product, and there might be other bits of it that also contribute, right? But the thing is that when you're working on all of those little bits and pieces, your customers don't care. Even when you integrate them into sort of the middle bits, they actually probably care less because now you've kept them waiting. And finally, when you deliver it to them, yeah, well, okay, great. But what if they'd got impatient and got on Google and actually found a competitor's product that was already there and might even be cheaper than yours? Whoops. So instead, let's start to sort of come at it a slightly different way. Here's another stolen slide. I stole this from Henrik Nyberg. You see, if you put things together as components, in this example, it's like, who wants to buy just the wheel of a car? If you want a car, you don't want just a wheel. In fact, you don't even want all the wheels. In fact, you don't even want all of the wheels and the chassis. You want the whole car, right? Well, what if you came at things like this? That you ask somebody, why is a car important to you? And they're like, well, I want to be able to whiz around quickly, right? Well, how about a skateboard? Not really what I had in mind, bit wobbly. How about a scooter? Yeah. Or a bicycle? Yeah. A motorbike? Oh, now that's a bit more fun. I'm really liking this. Oh, you like fun? How about a sports car? Yes. You get it? Once again, by iterating and incrementing, you have your customer tell you what they want. Now, if you've got a great big idea and you want to break it down, just to let you know that it's actually possible, here's a terrifying flow diagram that I use when I'm training people and how you break up work, how you write a user story and break it down into things that are small enough for people to commit to. I'm not going to walk you through this. This typically takes a 2 to 6 hour exercise, but I really just want you to know that this is something you can do, okay? So instead, it would look a little bit more like this. Here's your little bit of something, and maybe it just about works enough for somebody to maybe find it useful. And here's some other little bits of something. But instead of actually decomposing from the big thing, let's think about it sort of turning around and contributing to the bigger thing. That's a bit more interesting. And here's some more the same way, and they all contribute to that thing, and that our customer actually really loves, right? That's the whole idea, that when you're taking an agile approach, you're kind of turning things upside down from an old school plan-driven waterfall approach. So let's put that over on one side. Now, the next one. We're doing pretty well here. We're getting well into it. So now, there are 2 definitions that I like to recommend to people. Definitions that will help you know when you're done and to help you know when you're ready to start. Definition of done, definition of ready. And one of the reasons I love these, I have a colleague who actually was working on a white paper. I don't know if he ever published it. And he let me know that in his research, he'd established that even a reasonably high performing team might reduce its rework by as much as 50% by introducing a definition of done, and maybe by another 50% by introducing a definition of ready. So in other words, cutting their rework in half and then in half again. That'd be good. Let me show you what I mean. These definitions are really just checklists. Here's a definition of ready, and it's a list of things that you must, should, could, maybe even won't consider to be certain that you're ready to start work on something. Over here, we have a definition of done, and it's the same thing. Things that you must, should, could, and won't have done to make sure that your work is actually finished. So how does it work? Well, here's an idea that we're going to work on. Does it meet the definition of ready? Tick, tick, tick. Yes, it does. So we're ready to go. And now we do some work to add value to it and turn it into something we can deliver. Does it meet the definition of done? Yes, it does. Excellent. We can release it. And there's our happy customer. There you go. I did like it. By the way, this is all native PowerPoint, right? If I end up not being able to make a living out of anything else, I should try and make a living out of putting PowerPoints together. I'm very proud of this slide. It's one of my favorite fun slides. Anyhow, I'm not here to boast about my PowerPoint prowess. So anyhow, let's put that on one side. So can you see how things like the definition of ready and definition of done would help you actually avoid technical debt, right? If your definition of ready includes things like, do we fully understand the value to the customer, or do we actually have at least a good test for what it is that could prove that this is going to be valuable to a customer, that then when it's done and we show a customer, we can either validate or invalidate our ideas. And they want to be small and quick so that we can adjust course, right? Can you see how all of these things are starting to come together? All right, a few more. Now this is a fun story, this one. So I was once working at a very large client. I came in early in the morning got into the elevator, and this guy, big tall guy in a suit, got in behind me. And you know what it's like in Silicon Valley with us engineers. Suits are people to be a little bit nervous about. And anyhow, I pushed the button for the elevator to go up, and it got stuck. Huh. So I figured we'd be stuck there for a bit. So I introduced myself to this guy. I said, hello, I'm Andrew. I'm one of the Agile coaches. And he peers down his nose at me and he says, well, I'm the Chief Financial Officer. Agile, huh? Between you and me, I actually think this Agile stuff is frankly a bit of a waste of time and money. Oh, so I was a little taken aback. But anyhow, I looked at him and went, oh, okay, well, that's kind of interesting. Look, we may be stuck here for a bit. Would you mind if I showed you something? He went, oh, God, if you must, all right. And this is what I showed him. Now, I didn't have the benefit of PowerPoint, but, you know, I had the back of an envelope and a pen. And once again, it was one of these sets of axes. You see, what I showed him was, look, what we're trying to achieve is to release a set of tested working features, because that's what actually holds value for us, right? And typically, we're trying to release a set of them by some point in time. And that sort of sets a goal for us, right? And if we were to just go ahead and do a sort of plan-driven approach, what we call waterfall, then typically it kind of looks like this. You do a bunch of analysis. There's no tested working features yet. You do a bunch of design. Useful, but there are no tested working features yet. You do a bunch of build, good, but there's still no tested working features. And then you start testing, and you test and fix and test and fix, and oh no, you're late, oh whoops. And why are we late? We're late because of what we didn't know, that we didn't know. Remember that at the beginning? And the problem is that when you do it this way, you don't find out until about there when it's too late to do anything about it. Whoops. Oh dear. Now, if we take an iterative and incremental approach, the way we do with an agile approach, we come at it slightly differently. We do a little bit of everything, analyze, design, build, test. Then we do it again, analyze, design, build, test. And pretty quickly, that lets us extrapolate out to see where we'd end up. And you see, if we were going to do exactly the same work, using the same resources, we'd end up in the same place. But the difference is that when you do it this way, you can actually see if you're going to be in trouble earlier. That allows you to make some decisions earlier. We might choose to settle for a smaller feature set and arrive on time. We might choose instead to release late and have the full feature set. If we actually really need to hit the goal, well, then what we might need to do is to employ another team and shift the slope of our work so that we hit it. By the way, top tip, and I could talk to you about this all night, I won't, just take the tip. Do not add people to an existing performing team. It will slow them down. It will not speed them up, because you're going to add to the complexity of communication in that team. If you need to speed things up, add another team, right? That's a whole talk for another night. Just take it as a tip for now. Anyhow, you see the point that we've got here. If you take an iterative and incremental approach, it allows you to actually make decisions earlier. But look, here's the thing. This guy's the Chief Financial Officer. He doesn't really care so much about all this. He's like, show me the money. Right. Well, if you take the traditional approach, what happens? You follow this line, you spend a load of money, you create an enormous amount of risk. There's financial risk, there's reputation risk, there's all kinds of things that you cannot mitigate until you actually release it. And at this point, you don't know how that's going to go. You've just created risk for yourself. Oops. So let's say you spent $4 million. All right, we'll be generous. Let's say it works out, and sometime later you've made your $4 million back. You're actually $1 million ahead, $5 million of revenue. Good. Well, if you're taking this iterative and incremental approach, we do it in much smaller bites. You do a bit of work, you release the highest value. You do it again, you do it again, you do it again, until you get to some point where you could release something and not be ashamed of it, because you keep showing your customers until they go, yes, that's what I want, right? And look at the amount of risk we created there. Tiny by comparison. We followed this curve that sort of weighted to the front, because we're always trying to do the highest value, smallest thing, right? Let me just do some sums around this. In that first instance, the return on investment was 25%. But in this second one, we actually did, about half of the effort. Now, we didn't make quite as much return, but still, when you look at the ratio, in this case, about 75% return on investment. And look, this is just to illustrate the idea, right? These are not precise numbers. But that's the idea, that you've saved yourself all of that extra work that was going to add very little extra value. So you actually get to your return on investment much more quickly, and it's a higher return on investment. So if you know how to do that, why don't you stop there and do it again, and then stop and do it again? That way, well, we could quote any number of companies that have created all of that risk and it went wrong for them. This way, that's where the super effective companies, the Googles, the Apples, they all go that way. So pick one. Well, the CFO took the envelope that I'd scribbled on, took it back to his office, pinned it on the wall, and things were never the same again. Because this is why companies actually care about Agile. Never mind the rest of it, it's just this, right? It's the actual getting to return on investment quickly and with a higher return. So there you go. If you actually need to try and sell Agile to the decision makers, that little bit of it should do the job for you. Right, let's start wrapping it up. There's a few things that you might want to know about how you actually put all of this together. Story mapping. This is one of the tricks that guy Jeff Patton came up with. It looks like this. If you're going to do something that adds value to a customer, there's typically some steps that they will follow. User activities, a beginning, a middle, and an end, right? And if you were to write them out, you might see that the beginning, middle, and end are connected using words like "and then." I click the button, and then the form is shown, and then I fill it in and close it. Something like that. We call that the backbone. Now, you can actually decompose this probably using the techniques I showed you a little bit before, right, into some smaller chunks of work. And those would all be little chunks of it that would add up to it. I do the first bit by doing this and this and this. I do the next bit by doing this and this and this. That we'd call the walking skeleton. And you might add some different pathways through it, some options. And we would spread those out by necessity. What's the most necessary one first? The most valuable one, the most useful, right? That's the walking skeleton with some bones on it. Now, if we've actually been working in an agile manner already, we may well be able to do some estimation around how much effort is involved in all of these things. That means we might be able to split them out across a bunch of different planning periods, iterations, sprints, release planning periods, whatever they are, right? And the intention would be that at the end of each planning period, we'd have achieved a specific outcome that would be recognized by our customers or users, right? And we could then update the next one and the next one and the next one, right? Now, this approach even allows us to take into account that there may well be some different skill sets that we need within each of these outcomes. This is often the case where you're working in large organizations and multiple teams are working on the same thing at the same time. Here we have a green team, a red team, and a blue team. Now, you can see how for each of the steps in each of the iterations, these teams are making a contribution to that outcome. Well, if you take a story map like this and flip it on its side, good Lord, what you've got there is a release plan. You now actually know what teams are working on what things in the first sprint and what you're planning, and you may need to update them for subsequent sprints. This is worth its weight in gold because now you actually have something that you can use to coordinate your work across multiple teams, and your program management folks have actually got something to get their teeth into, all right? Let me pop this release planning notion over on one side. Now, we do all of this kind of planning inside a particular sort of shape and at a particular cadence. The shape we call the planning onion, and the cadence we call rolling wave planning. This is what the planning onion looks like. The outer layer is the organization's vision, which will be fulfilled by a portfolio of products that will be planned across a release planning period, a mid-range planning period, that's then worked on in iterations and daily work. Now, the vision sets direction, and the daily work fulfills the detail. The direction is fulfilling on the purpose. The vision and the purpose are fully aligned. The purpose and the products that fulfill on those purposes are usually fulfilled by epics. Epics are like great big stories with outcomes that are too big for one team to work on in one sprint or one iteration. Stories are portions of epics that in themselves have specific outcomes, ideally, that can be completed inside an iteration by a team. And then tasks are the things that the team members actually do every day to make the stories that contribute to the epics, that develop the products that fulfill on the purpose. Executives set the purpose and start to define the products. They include management in that. Management will then be looking at what kind of epics would they need to work on in collaboration with the teams, who then decompose things into stories and their tasks. And that's how you pull your organization together. And you do it in a sort of cadence. There's the daily work. There's the iteration or sprint work. There's the quarterly or release planning, the midterm planning, and the portfolio and roadmap, and the overall vision. And if we were in a room together, I'd have some fun right now. I'd tell you to stare at the screen, keep staring at the screen, and put your wallet on one side and quietly get up and leave the room. And it's never worked. Just as well, I'd make a lousy hypnotist. Anyhow, you get the idea. There's a sort of a rhythm to this, these rolling waves and the planning onion, right? There we go. Let's pop that over to one side. Now we can pull all of this stuff together with Agile frameworks. And you want to think of the frameworks as being like gyms inside which you can actually sort of exercise your methodology to buff up both your process and your product. There are two major ones that we consider, and both of them are thinking this way. When does value show up? At the beginning? No, it shows up at the end. So how quickly can we get to the end? The first one is Kanban. You've probably heard of this. Kanban has a set of values, set of principles and practices. It focuses on minimizing work in progress and visualizing the flow of that work, focusing on flow, making things visible and explicit, and having lots of feedback cycles, right? We could train you in this, a 2-day training, a 3-day training, a master's training, right? There's a lot to learn in Kanban. The other one you've probably heard of is Scrum, good old Scrum. Now, Scrum has 3 artifacts: the product backlog, that's a list of all of the stuff that you think you're going to make, and you refine the highest value, smallest portions of it that are then accepted into a sprint backlog by your team, who turn it into a potentially shippable increment of product. You've got 3 roles: the product owner, that's responsible for the value and for the product backlog, the team that commit to the sprint backlog, and the Scrum Master that looks after the whole process inside all of these events, these meetings, sprint planning, a daily stand-up to keep replanning, a review and demo to show your customers and get feedback, and a retrospective inside which you improve your process. The Scrum Master will help pull all of this together and help with the visibility using things like burn downs and task boards. So I'm going to pop these over on one side now, and let's just have a little look. How long have we got? We've got a few minutes. Now, does anybody have any questions? Let me just pop my webcam back on again. Now, I'm not actually seeing any. Am I seeing any questions in the chat? No, I'm not actually seeing any. So guys, if you can see at your end some questions in the chat, turn your microphone back on, let me know, and I can go ahead and actually answer some questions.
Hey, Andrew.
Hi.
Yeah, I'm not seeing any questions.
Good. Okay. Well, listen, I'll tell you what, that's just perfect. I'm going to go ahead and make my final point now. You see, I like to deal with questions just before the final point, so you go away with a nice taste in your mouth, okay? And of course, if anybody has any thoughts afterwards where they're like, oh, actually, you know what, I did have a question, fine, they can go ahead and email me. All of my contact details are going to be fully available. Let me just flip my webcam back off again. There we go. And let me go ahead and actually make the final point. All right. So we've dealt with the questions. There we go. Now, why does all of this actually matter? Well, back in 2001, a bunch of very smart engineers got together. They'd already figured out a lot of this stuff, and they'd been in touch with each other several times. They'd been thinking about this for a long time. Many people had. And they got together in a place called Snowbird in Utah, and they had a bunch of beer and pizza and decided to capture what it was they agreed on. There's something they called the Agile Manifesto. And people usually relate to the manifesto as a set of 4 values and 12 principles, and they miss the thing I'm going to show you, which is the introductory line. It goes like this. We, not I or you or he or they, we. This is something that's done collaboratively and collectively, right? We are, not we have or we're going to or we might, right? We are. This is talking about something you do in the present. And when does the present happen? All the time, right? So in other words, this is something that collectively we want to be doing all the time. We are uncovering. So get this. It's not we have established, or we are promoting, or we are certain. It's we are uncovering. How do you uncover things? Well, you have to pay attention to them. This is hard work. Remember everything I was saying before about how we have a brain that likes to take patterns from the past, project them into the future so it doesn't have to think things through? Yeah, this is hard work. This is why this all takes practice. You have to pay attention to uncover what's actually going on right in front of you all the time, because most of it will be emergent. It's stuff you've never actually seen before, right? We are uncovering better, not best. There is no best in all of this. Well, maybe, but it's better if you assume that there is no best. Better, but how would you know that it's better? What are you measuring? Better compared to what? So all of those different dimensions of value that I was talking about before, those would be important. What else is there that you could experiment with that would help you know if things were better? We are uncovering better ways. Well, what ways? I don't know. You're going to have to uncover them. Well, truth be told, we've been uncovering better ways for a very long time. And there are many better ways that you might find apply in your situation, but they might not. You have to uncover that as well. And one of the traps that I see is that people, for example, just go and go, oh, we've got the better way of Scrum. Just do Scrum. And people stop thinking. Scrum is not a methodology. It's a framework to set up the conditions inside which you can uncover better ways. It's not something to stop you from thinking. Kanban the same. All methodologies, really the good ones, they're about uncovering better ways. And there are technical practices, there's code craftsmanship practices. There are so many ways that we've uncovered, and we're still uncovering, funnily enough. We're uncovering better ways of developing software. Well, the guys that wrote this, it was months, in fact, really just weeks before they were like, you know what? It's not just software. This applies to so many things. We can say we're uncovering better ways of working. I've actually had sessions with people where we've done deep dives into this, and we've got to where we are uncovering better ways of living. And even on one memorable, slightly drunken philosophical evening, we're uncovering better ways of being. Oh, that was a splendid evening, I can tell you. But you get the point. If you're in a world of like, oh, well, Agile only applies to software. No, it doesn't. We know where Agile is being applied in medicine, in law, lots of places in hardware, lots and lots of different situations, right? This is not something that just applies to software. Anywhere where you're doing some work where you might not have done exactly this work before, Agile thinking applies. If you're just churning out cookies, right, on a manufacturing line, probably not. But anything else, it applies, right? Okay, we're very nearly there. We're very nearly there. We're uncovering better ways of working by doing it. This is practitioner driven. This is not something where you want to just believe the theoreticians. You need to do this. And by helping others do it, which not only speaks to it being something that's collaborative, it also speaks to that great principle that you can have whatever you want if you find enough other people and help them get what they want. And listen, I want to acknowledge you guys. The kind of people that show up to something like this are the kind of people who actually care, not just about improving their own lives, but the lives of other people as well. And thank you very much for being here for this. So are we done? Yes, we're done. That's all for now. Let's celebrate that. Woo, jolly good. And go back to work. We can do this, all right? So thank you very much. My name is Andrew Webster. I'm Chief Cook and Bottle Washer at WCS. I'm available for training, coaching, speaking, bar mitzvahs, weddings, funerals, and do feel free to contact me and make sure that the guys get a copy of this deck to you and a handout that goes with it. Guys, I'm done. Back to you. We can wrap this up.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. That was a very excellent presentation. I definitely enjoyed it. Very good. I'm sure all our listeners out there, the attendees for this meetup, enjoyed it. So everyone out there, all the attendees, thank you for joining this week's webinar. Just want to let you know that we did record it. This is being recorded, and we will send out a recorded copy to you guys. And thanks again, everyone, for joining. And thank you, Andrew.
Thank you, everyone. Garrett, I'll speak to you soon. Thanks, you all. Bye-bye.
Bye, guys.